Alrighty, welcome back everyone. We just talked about some of the steals that I have pegged for this upcoming draft. Did one per position, so if you want to check that out, you can definitely check it out on our page. But let's jump into some spring breakdowns. Spring games are in full swing, and this is the weekend where everything goes crazy, to be totally honest with you. We have more games than I can possibly count. There are more games than I was able to preview here in the time that we have, but we'll try to break down as many as possible. I believe we have 11 throughout these two segments here, but let's jump right in and let's talk about Florida because they are a team that I think a lot of people are confounded by, to be totally honest with you. I think some of the big storylines, the way we kind of do this is just I'll go a storyline and then what I'm kind of watching for in particular. But the storylines for this team are pretty simple. I mean, can Billy Napier put together a season to keep his job? This is the first time that we're able to see this Florida team in, all its glory on, the national stage. And it's going to be interesting to see how Billy Napier looks, how the guys respond to him, how just the old demeanor of the team looks. There seems to be a lot of excitement coming out of that camp right now, but you never really know until you hit the field. So a ton of pressure on him, and then a ton of transfers and big-time players going to the NFL. How can they replace those guys, and can they keep it going at least enough to keep Billy Napier in town? Because I think that's one of the big worries for Florida fans and for Billy Napier in particular is if he, struggles again this year, if they put up a 5-7, 6-6 type year, he's likely out the door. So the work starts tomorrow. Everything gets very real tomorrow. So it'll be really interesting to see all that unfold. But for what I'm watching for in particular, first of all, how comfortable does Graham Mertz look? He was very accurate last year. I believe the number one guy in the country in terms of accuracy, but there wasn't a lot of pushing the ball downfield. If you watch Florida, there was a lot of, taking some screens, taking some dump offs, and that's a good way to go about offense as long as, you have a good defense and you can run the ball and you can do certain things. But Florida kind of struggled with that. The O-line was not great, which is another reason for those short passes so often. And the defense was especially bad. So they're going to have to push the ball downfield more. They're going to have to get Graham Mertz to not only be a guy that executes an offense, but a guy that, takes over an offense and really dominates for times to time. And it doesn't have to be, game in, game out, but he does have to make some more big time plays this year than he did a year ago. And also, I'm just watching DJ Lagway because this kid is awesome. I cannot wait to see him on the field for the first time. The ball just launches out of this kid's hands, and he's been dubbed the savior of Gator football, so it'll be interesting to see the reaction that the fans give him tomorrow. But another thing I'm watching for, tons of guys returning on defense. Does this look like an SEC level defense, or is it going to be the one that gives up a Heisman moment again this year? We watched that Jaden Daniels game against them. That is the best single man performance I think I've ever seen. He was just on another level, both throwing and running the ball. So Florida's got to be better than that. They got to be a whole lot better than that. So it'll be really interesting to see how this defense look, who the playmakers are, who the difference makers are, and can they be those difference makers when the season comes around? But tons of turmoil around Gainesville, but hopefully some is subsided tomorrow. But let's move on over to their bitter rival in Athens, Georgia, the one that stole one of their running backs, in fact. But one of the storylines, or a couple of the storylines, is this is time to get back to business. Georgia has been, knocked off the mountaintop. Michigan has the crown right now, but Georgia is fully in line to take it back. So it's going to be really interesting to see this team in first action. I think there are going to be some guys flying around. I really hope there are no injuries or anything. I'm sure guys will be told to throttle it back just a little bit, but guys are going to be really excited to have football again and get this party started for Georgia because they have their eyes set on one thing, and that's a national title. But another thing is how does this offense that we talked about yesterday, if you want to go check that out, it's on the page as well. But how does this offense that we previewed yesterday, how do they look in their first action? There is a ton of moving parts in that offense, a couple of transfers coming in, a couple of big time guys that need to step up into bigger roles, and we never really know how that'll look until we see it in real action. So very excited to see how this if this offense just clicks right off the bat, is there some growing pains, that type of thing, will be really interesting to watch. What I'm watching for in particular, has this wide receiver room taken shape the way that I expect, and I think a lot of Georgia fans in general expect? There's tons of really, really solid guys. There's tons of guys that can make plays. Is there an alpha in that room, I think, is the biggest question. When you look around the country to all of the remarkable wide receiver rooms, there tends to be one guy you point to and say, that's the dude in that room. Like Emeka Egbuka at Ohio State, although Jeremiah Smith is doing plenty to ruin that for him very quickly. If you talk about Isaiah Bond at Texas, if you talk about, Trey Harris at Ole Miss, there's so many guys, but they all have, that guy. They all have the go-to, the number one receiver, and Georgia, at least looking over the roster, doesn't necessarily have that right this second. Now, that could very easily come to fruition tomorrow where you find someone where Carson Beck just keeps looking in the direction. They keep passing him the ball, and that would make sense to me. So very excited to see this game in particular. But another thing that I'm watching is who are the starters on the back end, especially at the corner positions. It sounds like it's going to be Daniel Harris, and I believe Dalen Everett is the other one. But I don't know how this back end will look overall. I mean, no Malachi Starks in this game, which, while, you'd love to see that guy out there, I think is kind of a plus for this group in particular, because you get the guys that are a little bit more unknown. You get them more snaps. You get them against the number one offense where they might have been against the number two offense at times. So I think that's a huge help to them. Malachi Starks will be more than fine. He will be ready to go when fall camp comes around, but you definitely get to see what some of these younger guys, the KJ Bolden, the Ellis Robinson, the third, all of those guys, what they have to offer. And I think they have to offer quite a bit, but we'll find out tomorrow for certain. But let's move on to Kentucky here. And these storylines are very interesting. Basically, can Kentucky be what they weren't a year ago? Can Brock Vandagriff be the guy that Devin Leary wasn't? Because that was the big bugaboo last year. You brought in Devin Leary. You felt like everything was in place, and it never really came to fruition. So it'll be interesting to see what happens there. And also, what does the running back room look like? And is there an alpha there? Is it Chip Trainum that came over? Do they have Demi Sumo Karingbe? Is he the guy that's kind of popping off? But we'll find out. I have not seen them in on Damian Martinez, the running back coming into the transfer portal from Oregon State. But I definitely think they could be fairly quickly, especially if the running backs just don't necessarily look that strong when we get to tomorrow. But what I'm watching for in particular is, can this wide receiver room live up to their remarkable potential? I think every single box in this wide receiver room is checked. They have tons of guys that they can go to. They even have a ton of depth where they didn't have it a year ago, I think. So I think there's a ton of ability. The question is it going to turn into wins? Because last year there was a lot of ability in this room, and it just never really quite clicked the way you want it to. Now you have Brock Vandagriff, who can push the ball down the field, which I think will help guys like Barry and Brown and possibly Dane Key be the difference makers they're capable of being. But it'll be interesting to see how all of that unfolds. And then how does the depth on the defense look? I know that J.J. Weaver and Deone Walker are good on the defensive line. I know Jamon Dumas-Johnson is good at the linebacker position. I know Maxwell Harrison is good at corner. I need to know that the 2s and the 3s are good as well, because if Kentucky really wants to compete, that's where the money is made. Let's be totally honest. And then let's move on to Alabama here. The storylines are very clear, and I think we all know the storylines. This is the first time without Saban on the sideline. Is going to be really weird. How different does it look? And does it look good? I guess is the biggest question. And also, how do these players respond to the coaching staff? I think that's a huge thing when you bring in, especially in this circumstance where you have someone like Nick Saban walking out the door. You got to make sure that this next coaching staff is in a position to demand a lot of these kids, and these kids respond to them the same way they responded to Saban. Obviously, that's a tough thing to pull off, but you kind of have to do it if Bama's going to be successful and Kalen DeBoer is going to be successful. But some things specifically I'm watching for is how does the O-line look? There are tons of guys finding their way kind of into starting roles or a couple of transfers in. No Caden Proctor yet, which means young guys will get more and more run. Just overall, how does this group look from top to bottom, not just the starting line? Because I think the starting line will be very solid this year, to be totally honest, especially with Caden Proctor coming back into the mix. But you're going to need depth for sure, and you're going to need a good bit of it. So I think it'll be really interesting to see not only how the top line works, but how the second line works and so on. And then, has Jalen Milroe taken a significant step forward in the NFL level type throws? That's something that they're absolutely going to need this year. Everyone knows the Jalen Milroe, formula. Everyone gets that he is a difference maker with his legs and he can throw a deep ball about as good as anyone in the entire country. Then they can key on that and it becomes a little bit more dangerous. But at the end of the day, if he can start making those layered passes, start making those second level passes that are, over a linebacker but under a safety and on a crosser, and it just the ones that NFL scouts look at and say, oh, okay, this kid is capable of making that play. I think he definitely needs to make a ton more of those. And if he does, this offense could be very interesting. Also, another thing to watch is just how did this wide receiver group look? Jalen Hale went down early, I think recently in spring practice, so he will not be playing. So tons of other guys will have to step up. Caleb Oden is a tight end technically, but he's someone definitely to watch because I think he could be a difference maker right from the get-go in his freshman year. But let's move on to Ole Miss, and this will not be the last SEC team we do, but at least in this section it is. But Ole Miss, the storylines are, does this big transfer portal class work? Is it going to work the way that Lane Kiffin had pictured it? And does this defense take a marketable step forward? Because they absolutely have to. And that kind of goes hand in hand. The transfer portal class was largely on the defensive side of the ball, and they need a lot of those guys to hit. But what I'm watching for in particular is this retool back end. We just talked about the transfer portal class. A lot of that was in the back end of this defense, and they're going to need some guys to step up big. They got Trey Amos. They got Brandon Turnage. I think they're going to need some other guys to step up big time and show that they can play as a cohesive five group, because I think they have plenty of talent, but plenty of talent doesn't necessarily get you anything if those five guys can't play in unison. So that's the biggest thing for me that I'm watching. And then how does Jackson Dart look in his limited action? Tons of transfer receivers coming in. I think he'll look more than fine, but at the end of the day, you want to make sure that he's on the same page as guys like Juice Wells, because if he's not, things could get a little bit hairy for that offense, or at least not necessarily hairy, but you want to take a step forward. You want to be one of the difference maker offenses in the entire country this year because the ability is there. There's no two ways about that. So you don't want it to look the way it looked last year. You want it to look crisper and more on time, and everything just look a little bit more explosive. So very excited to see how that one unfolds. And then finally, Ohio State. We broke this one down a little bit more in depth a while ago when talking about the fact that this would be broadcast on Fox tomorrow, but we'll break it down a little bit more because some things have changed a little bit. First of all, Ryan Day just needs to deliver. This is the year. This is where all of this starts, and hopefully he can start strong because there will be some big-time questions if some players that need to look good tomorrow do not. And then the quarterback battle in Columbus is real. It's something that I think Devin Brown genuinely is in a position to win that job over Will Howard, and we'll find out. Or people will have very aggressive positions on it at the very least after tomorrow. So it'll be really interesting to watch that unfold. What I'm watching for in particular is, we talked about that quarterback battle. Who are the guys responding to? Who is the guy that they point to and, give all the hype when he scores a touchdown, or when he yells, or when he yells out instructions to someone? They listen very intently because sometimes that is the deciding factor in all of this, and it tends to go to the guy that's been around a while in Devin Brown, but Will Howard's a great leader. He's been around a lot of different teams. He's done a really great job when he was at Kansas State of being a great leader for that team, so it'll be really interesting to see how these guys respond to these two guys and see if at least the roster has picked their quarterback of sorts. And then how does this O-line look? There's plenty of talent, some transfers that are going into their second year, some transfers that came in, and it was shaky at best last year. It has to be better. It has to give these guys some time because neither one of these guys are elite with their legs. Will Howard is capable with his legs, but it's more design run type thing, so you can't necessarily leave him out there on an island, I guess is the best way to put it. But tons of really good games coming up tomorrow. We will continue to break down those games after this break, so stick with us, and we will be right back.